What? Oh, I see. It's a Star Trek review, so you expect me to just beam into the chair because, you know, transporters have always been so accurate in Star Trek lore. Well, let me tell you something. This ship doesn't have the energy to waste for intra-ship transportation. It's needless and unnecessary. And that might also be redundant. All my loyal years of service, and they make me captain of a shuttlecraft. I should have been an independent contractor. I'd have made more money that way. Anyway, as you may have guessed, for the 30th review on Gamer Mouse, we're doing something a little bit special. A never-before-seen Macintosh game simply known as Star Trek The Next Generation, the Transinium Challenge. Yeah, I know, just rolls right off the tongue. There's a whole universe of Star Trek games out there, though, so you know what that means. It's Star Trek Month! It's also known as Star Trek. It would be a month if I actually put out a review a week and did this for a living, but Star Trek Month has a much better ring to it when you're doing a series of 4 Star Trek related reviews. The Transinium Challenge is made by Transfiction Systems, the same people that made a little game called Hidden Agenda. Will their experience in making a game about political corruption and intrigue help them out here in creating an interactive episode based off of one of the most beloved series, if not the most so, out of the Star Trek franchise? There has been a couple of excellent, if slightly out of genre, games based off of Voyager after all, so what could go wrong with this? Let's find out. Welcome to the Gamer Mouse Show, where bad games will burn. Tanara's keeping you in tow, so that you will learn. Johnson might be the smartest, since he is quite an artist. Anyone who thinks there's no gaming on Mac, you better think again. Tanara, he is a mouse, punch, wears some fancy scrubs. Tanara, he is a 941, who's he think he is? Tanara. Swords, cyborgs, fights on top of trains. Tanara. This gameplay's lame. Tanara. And that's the closest I'll ever come to having a Linkara crossover. It almost happened. I have the email to prove it. Ah well, maybe I could review Shatter with him sometime. That would be fun. But the Mike Sands retrospective comes later. It's a shame he's not here. I'm not really intimately familiar with Star Trek lore and continuity. Certainly not in the same insanely in-depth way he is. It's okay though, there's more than enough plot holes here for everyone. And if you think I'm spoiling anything, trust me, it becomes apparent real quickly. Starting off, it seems promising enough. The Enterprise is responding to a terrorist attack on a mining base in the remote Aquila system, which is the only place that contains a low-grade fuel known as Transinium, called the poor man's dilithium crystal in the manual. Yes, you get a low-grade computer beat version of the beginning of the Next Generation theme. No sampled sound for us. You'd think they could squeeze something into one of the 2 floppies it comes on, or heck, you know, use some mod files or something. We've seen it done before on this channel. I would steal Linkara's joke about Starfleet having only 2 starships operating at any given time, but the Enterprise being the only ship at range actually makes sense. Aquila is a remote outer rim system, so I can actually see that happening. On top of that, if you're taking too long, Starfleet tells you that the Enterprise is under threat of being pulled from heading the mission, so they apparently have someone else on the way. I say apparently because it seemed like I could dick around for a good long while and it never actually happened, so maybe they're empty threats from Starfleet and Linkara's theory is still right after all. Now, in the Transinium challenge, for whatever reason, Picard decides to place Riker in evaluative command of the Enterprise. Probably not the wisest decision, putting an unproven commander in charge of investigating a terrorist attack of questionable motives surrounding an unknown substance. Maybe wait until a slightly less dangerous situation to let him test his mettle. In fact, I think they have you play as Riker and not Picard, so you don't make Picard look monumentally stupid, but we'll get to that later. You also may notice that you're playing as a beardless Commander Riker. Apparently this is like 24 of the game. The Transinium challenge takes place between Seasons 1 and 2 of Next Generation, like 24 of the game took place between Seasons 2 and 3 of that show. Worf and Geordi have their gold uniforms, but Crusher is still the CMO, so it seems to be a transitionary period on the Enterprise. The plot starts off intriguing. A terrorist attack in a system almost devoid of permanent inhabitants and specializing in mining a cheap dilithium replacement is rather odd, so it does make you curious about what in the world is going on. Not that there isn't a lot of tension in the system in between competing mining interests, the Klingon outpost and Maholi colonies. Who are the Maholi? Apparently a race oppressed by the Klingons that we'd never hear about outside of this game. Joy. Just like the Transinium, it's not canon, so who cares, right? That seems to be the attitude here, anyway. So after the intro, where you rescue the ungrateful commander of the El Dorado mining base, you are now put in command to do whatever you like. Transporting down and talking to the commander gets a request for Federation troops at El Dorado, and soon after you get a request to pull the troops back from Dr. Alfred Parks. Once again, no clue who he is, he shows up nowhere else in Star Trek canon. Apparently a respected researcher or something, which means you'd think I would have heard of this guy before. Not sure where the troops are coming from. If it's my security crew, I'm really not sure how much help they'll be. Security in Star Trek seems to be pretty useless. This is where all the problems with the game start to become quite apparent. Your crew offers a variety of information, none of which is really all that helpful. Keeping the troops there, I had moved on to try and discover more about the system when I ran into the terrorist ship. Considering the situation and deciding to try and not engage, hoping to make contact, data tells me the ship escapes at speeds approaching Warp 17. Warp 17, huh? Well, it's been a really long time since I watched Next Generation. I figured I need a little bit of a refresher, but I'm still pretty sure we could only go Warp 10. Well, saying you can go Warp 10 is a little bit of a exaggeration. That's transwarp, occupying all places in space simultaneously, is Warp 10. Which I know from the Star Trek Encyclopedia. Well, I also know it from memory, but I confirmed it with the Star Trek Encyclopedia. A good read for nerds and nerds in training. So yeah, and the fastest the ship went in the original series was, I believe, Warp 14 or 15, which happened when the engines were sabotaged and was threatening to make the ship fly apart. So, yeah, I don't know what Warp 17 is supposed to be in Next Generation. Is that occupying all places in time as well as space? I have no clue what Warp 17 is supposed to be here. No, wait. Actually, I think I do know what Warp 17 is.
Ludicrous speed! Go!
You're approaching the animated series in terms of ridiculous warp factor levels, game. The animated series, damn it! That thing only lasted one season for a reason, you know. But let's assume you know nothing of Star Trek. Don't worry, there's still plot holes you can indulge in just from what you know in this game. Our first order of business is to track down that terrorist ship that can go Warp 17. Oh, that's just ridiculously stupid. First time I just tried firing a bunch of phasers at it, but all the advice of my crew said not to use brute force after they got away. They also say the ship is really fast and has twice the power of a Galaxy-class starship, which happens to be what I'm flying. I tried evading around, hanging back, even lowering my shields, which gets a pretty good response from Worf, and evading around to try and make contact, all kinds of tactics. Up until I got close and unloaded torpedoes, and doing that a couple of times, succeeded. Huh. Brute force isn't the way of the Federation, huh? That's funny, it seemed to work. Against a ship that's twice as powerful as a Galaxy-class starship, no less. Makes a whole lot of sense. The first time through, I'd ended up getting Dr. Parks' wife killed in a giant explosion and had allied with a crooked Klingon earlier who found out that Transinium amplifies power reactions, so I had put the galaxy under threat of takeover from superpowered Klingon ships. Whoops. See what I mean about incredibly stupid decisions? But can you really blame me? Your crew's advice is mixed like always, and you don't see the Klingon's bio until after you meet him. When you meet him, though, you're expected to make a decision. You can get some info by getting some drinks on the bar on this asteroid, but get too many drinks and you're so hammered that you can't continue on the mission. Ah! By the way, does Transinium sound a lot like trilithium from Star Trek Generations? Oh, no, wait, it was obvious trilithium was dangerous, not mistaken for a low-grade fuel, but Transinium still makes for really powerful weaponry like trilithium does. Let's chalk this slight similarity to coincidence and move on. Besides, I can't even fathom the thought that someone on the Generations movie team played this thing, much less got inspired by it. Speaking of which, the Maholi seem familiar too. Short, rotund aliens due to their original habitat. Once again, I refuse to believe they'd be inspired by this game of all things, so we're just gonna move on. Easy enough to fix these decisions, though. Just play through again and make the opposite decisions. You'll also realize that a really irritating part of the game is just flying around trying to track down this stupid terrorist ship. There is an interesting twist here, though. The terrorist is actually the Maholi from earlier, hoping to use the previously untapped power of Transinium to wrest themselves from their Klingon oppressors. Except he got drunk on power and started getting really careless. Huh. So maybe since they're not skilled in combat, I could take him head-on in a ship half as powerful because he's a really shitty aim. Actually, they hand-wave it by saying that his fire control computers aren't compensating for his higher power levels, but I like my theory better. Tarkin is a terrible aim. It's with an E, not an I, but insert your Star Wars joke here. Oh, but that was the easy part of the game. Now comes the real confusing part. Now that he's no longer under threat by the terrorist, who was previously his assistant, Dr. Parks will tell you that due to the power of Transinium, this information cannot get into the wrong hands and the asteroid belt needs to be evacuated and destroyed. Yeah. Remember, brute force is not the way of the Federation. You go to Aquila 4 and beam down and you'll find a holographic storage medium, like a flash drive for holographic video or something. Of course you don't know that when you pick it up. Worf cautions you that it may be something dangerous, like a bomb. At this point, I guess I wouldn't have been surprised. Now, if you beam down again, you'll end up running into these two children, a human and a Ferengi. You have to use the Consider button to get the option of taking them back to the Enterprise. Consulting any of your crew never gives that option, which is what I thought they were there for. They can't seem to talk yet, but if you consult the crew, you can get the option for Data to look after the children. Sure, why not? What could go wrong with that?
Oh shit.
Open sesame!
You can explore all around the abandoned base, but all you'll find is some strange musical instrument. You have to know to send Geordi down with you because he can see things that the others can't. Unless there's interference that screws with his visor, like there always is to begin with. So that means you have to go to D39's mining base, where you talk to Valora and this other guy who really doesn't seem to want to be there. Eventually, Valora will give you a nullifier, which will fix Geordi's visor problem. But only if you've run into this problem already. Yeah. Otherwise, this is a waste of time. Joy bunnies. On the other hand, this means you can beam down anywhere with Geordi the very first chance you get. Somehow the interference is throughout the entire Aquila system, so then you go to Valora and talk until you get the nullifier. There's no time frame on this, so you can do this at the very beginning of the game. Oh, by the way, did I mention the graphics on people are awkward? I mean, the graphics are actually pretty good for black and white, but the contrast in animation on the people is just weird and unsettling. But the DOS version just looks like a scaled-down, uglier version of this, so there you go. Easy fight, Macintosh wins. Anyway, so go down with Geordi and Crusher, and you'll find some organic egg-looking thing, and you can consult with Crusher to take it to the lab of the ship. I cannot emphasize how much trial and error it took me just to get to this point. This game is a pain in the ass. That's the really big problem with this game. With the box and the manual telling you how you'll be making these important decisions and consulting carefully with your crew, there's surprisingly little of that going on. Instead, it ends up feeling like every other badly executed adventure game, using things with other things, or in this case, traveling with and dropping items in front of crew members until something ends up working. Oh, but you know what you do next? Nah, seriously, take a guess. You pretty much just wait. Yeah, that's just riveting. Star Trek The Next Generation, a spectacular interactive episode, brute force trial and error, a raping of the warp factor system, useless crew members, and waiting around for stuff to happen. This game sucks! So the egg will hatch and strangely look like a child version of Crusher, and the children will tell you their secret, that they're some of the last of a race of aliens that can shapeshift to hide among people and exchange their knowledge quite freely. I guess we should have figured something was up with a Ferengi child that wasn't trying to sell us anything. These two will tell you, after you let them go through your computers and weapon system schematics, which most of your crew discourages, by the way, that they require Transinium to, well, destroy all the Transinium. Even Picard later comments on the irony of that. So go and find this Ferengi trader and trade him stuff for Transinium. Credits, the holosphere, the instrument, the nullifier, all of it. Well, except the children. Oh yeah, did I mention that? You can sell these children to a Ferengi. Why do they even give you that option? How would that be anywhere within Riker's character? How much of a blank slate do they think he is? Oh my... holy hell, it's just wrong on every conceivable level. So, as Riker, you can doom the galaxy to Klingon rule, get stupidly drunk, get hostages killed, and sell children to a Ferengi. Our hero, everyone, leaving the galaxy to be screwed by the Klingons, which, knowing Klingon sex, would be really painful. Oh, but guess what? I ran into a wee bit of a problem with this. The first time I got this far, when I got to the point that the children wanted Transinium, one guy in the D-39 base was already dead, and for some reason, Valora would also drop dead right when I got to this point, cutting off the Ferengi's supply of Transinium. Now, given how consistently it happened, you'd think it was scripted, and I had to find the Transinium elsewhere. But no, that just meant the game turned out impossible this time around instead. Oh goody. Starting the game over again, I found out that this didn't happen the second time around. In fact, no one really died the second time around, so I was able to do all this without a hitch. Weird. Maybe it's because I already knew what to do at this point. But you know what that means, right? If you didn't do the first half of the game properly, the second half is impossible! Ah!
I'll just make a backup of this one.
And really, that's the whole game. You evacuate the system, somehow getting everyone in the system to leave behind their entire livelihood so that you can blow it up. I would maybe forgive this if they gave a reason or a cover they used, but no, they never explained what they told everyone to make them leave the system. Seems like a really, really important point to just gloss over like that, doesn't it? What the flying hell? Needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few indeed.
You may fire when ready.
I'm hardly kidding, that's almost a direct game quote. Huh, I guess we did make a Tarkin joke after all. Brute force is not the way of the Federation, everyone! Ugh. But who cares, we blow the hell out of the Transinium and get a commendation from Starfleet and Picard and end this freaking game. Wait, look at that capitalization on Starfleet, which the game can't even keep consistent. Really, game? Really? Yeah, and here's another error in the intro. A terrorist attack, or terrorist attacks, but you can't just say indicating terrorist attack in this context. It makes you sound stupid, Picard. I think there's other mistakes, but they're rather few and far between, and honestly, the dialogue is actually at least pretty descriptive most of the time, so I'll give it that at least. Besides, I don't want to do another grammar correction montage, at least not with that song, or I'll end up getting my YouTube videos blocked in Germany, like the Solo Joe review or something. Oh, and I guess we're not supposed to think about the possibility that the Ferengi may have kept some hunk of Transinium around. It'll be super rare now. Think of the profit on that. What Ferengi could resist? Another major plot hole. Bottom line, this game sucks balls. It only took me 4 hours to beat this thing, but it felt like forever, like some kind of pain-inflicting time loop that just would never end. Sad thing is, it had decent plot threads, decent graphics, pretty descriptive dialogue, even if it could have been a little better written, and even a mostly intuitive engine for an adventure game, at least for the time. There could have been a lot of interesting possibilities. Hell, the manual has more interesting possibilities than this game does. There's a situation where you can refuse or agree to political asylum for an ambassador, and Worf actually offers a more cautious third option if you consult with him. That sort of thing never happens in the game. The most clever part about the game is the manual, actually. To keep from spoiling anything in the game, nothing in the manual is from the game. It's all made exclusively for the manual. Even the Salacia system is made up solely for the manual. Aquila, Salacia, Tequila, and Salsa. Sounds more appetizing than this hunk of poorly developed sci-fi. The game is a great example to show that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts is not true. Which it isn't. The correct phrase is actually the whole is different than the sum of its parts, and this game pretty much sums that up perfectly. Maybe the problem was that the development team just didn't fit. The more open-ended nature of Hidden Agenda just didn't mesh with Star Trek, at least not in a linear storytelling sense, so the whole thing just turned out terrible. Which seems a shame. There's a lot of potential for a game like that in the Star Trek universe, trying to keep some kind of political peace among different systems of aliens with a lot of conflict between them. It just doesn't work well here with a set cast and most importantly a set plot line. If there are some different consequences to your different decisions that didn't result in outright failure, but rather just undesirable outcomes or different issues later down the road, now that could have been interesting. Oh yeah, and the manual teases at another game, Star Trek A Hostage to Reason, which actually seems like it has an interesting plotline to it, but it never came out because no one bought this game. I can't even find anything about this game on Google, so it must have been cancelled pretty early on, and this is probably the first and only time you'll ever hear about it. This is Tanara Kuranov signing off and hoping that the next game I review is better than the Transinium challenge. Crap! Shields up! Arm all weapons banks!
On the view screen is something rather unexpected. Rather than a Klingon, which would be more common in this area, a hawk morph with a commandeering aura about her stands firm, looking condescendingly at the recipient of her hail. This is Captain Axelson of the Austringer Empire. Lower your shields and prepare to be boarded, she states in a no-nonsense, if slightly bored voice, as if expecting a bigger threat. Curiously, her accent seems almost Russian. Tanara snickers lightly, unable to keep his snark to himself, even in such a dangerous situation. Austringer? You realize that's a term for someone who flies a hawk, right? He asks in a cocky, sarcastic tone. Axelson would look ever so slightly flustered, if partly just from the audacity of asking such a question under her threat. The Accipiter Empire left some of us out. She clears her throat lightly, regaining what slight amount of composure she had lost. She was correct, though. Being a red-tailed hawk, she would have been left out as well under such a name. That's not important. Lower your shields and surrender your ship. Tanara's composure would turn worrisome, obviously not thinking that was a good idea in the slightest. Me? Surrender to a hawk? He pauses, adjusting the collar of his uniform nervously. I somehow don't think that will bode well for me. Axelson sighed heavily, though it would come out like a quiet call of her species. We don't actually eat our prisoners. That's all rumor. Just lower your damn shields. She sounded more agitated, her patience starting to wear thin. Tanara makes a curious observation. Funny, you've brought up shields twice, but you haven't mentioned my weapons yet, he observed offhand. Axelson gives him a curious look. There is no energy signature from your weapons systems, she would say calmly, though a slight semblance of worry would show through her mostly stoic pose. Tanara would smirk lightly at this. Just because I'm peaceful doesn't mean I'm a pacifist, Axelson. Picard used a Thompson on the Borg before, prepared to see the starship equivalent. He let out, getting a bit more cocky at Axelson's confusion. Axelson scoffed slightly, looking irritated more than anything. Spare me your foreign cultural references and get to the point, mouse man. Tanara continued to smirk, gloating a little bit. This shuttlecraft is armed with high-caliber railguns and rotary cannons, along with anti-tank missiles, he said, suddenly pausing for a brief moment. His armament almost sounded like that of a Metal Gear. A Metal Gear in space. No, that would just be silly. Axelson would let out a dismissive huff. All primitive weapons, no doubt. Tanara was quick to respond. Primitive ballistic weapons, he said, putting an emphasis on the word ballistic. More than enough to take out deflector shields optimized for energy weapons. Now stand down or I open fire. Axelson's stoic composure would wane visibly at this, though just barely. I suppose you think you're so clever, Mouse Man. Tanara shook his head slightly. It's Captain Kuranov, though I kinda like the sound of that, Mouse Man. Coming from someone like you, at least. Axelson huffed softly. Don't get too excited. You'll be prisoners of the Austria Empire soon enough, and I can't guarantee the others will be as gentle. Tanara formed a sterner expression on his face as he heard this, worried what the Austringer Empire may bring in the future. You should leave before I change my mind on holding this weaponry back. Axelson calmly replies, So I shall, for now. We'll meet again, Mouse Man. She cuts off the communication and moves to warp away. Tanara gives a slight sigh. Even Tanara would work. The bird of prey has left our proximity. Alert down. He let out a relieved exhale. That was a close one. Suddenly, something dawns on him. Not about his current situation, but the game he was just playing. Wait a minute. Transinium. Transfiction Systems. Transinium. He notices the pun and lets out a very sarcastic, fake laugh. Ha.